Good morning. Thank you, Robert. Thank you very much for that introduction. I have to apologize for my croaky voice today. As most of you, I think, coming out with a cold as well. It's the end of the winter. I want to thank the organizers for this very kind invitation. It is a real pleasure for me to be in front of you today. My capacity as the chairman of the MEPC, I'm still not sure which one is easier to handle, if it's the position of Panama or that of the ambassador of the organization. But feel free to ask me any questions. I'm very happy to address any of them on either capacity. It's part of my role, it's part of my job, and I do it with pleasure. I want to highlight something. The timing of this conference, in my perspective, couldn't be any better. It's just 2 months after the entry into force of the new sulfur emissions on the ECA, the 0.1% that has been addressed by the industry, by the organization in several levels. But at the same time, it's just over 2 months before we meet again this year at the MEPC, where we're going to have the first opportunity to actually hear from the shipping industry, from operators, from governments, of any possible inconvenience that we may be encountering and then we may have to address at the IMO. So it's important that this kind of event express and share all those concerns, all that experience that you may have, because it's the only way that we consider that we could improve what we already know that is a very efficient sector, but we understand that we still have to keep working on it. Now, I would like to remind you all that the IMO is a forum that involves collaboration, and that collaboration comes from every single part and sector of the shipping industry. We're represented by member governments, but we also have the NGOs that represent several aspects and sectors from the shipping industry. We also have those non-governmental organizations that carry out different work, but very much related to the shipping sector, in particular those involving the environmental aspects. Now, it will be very easy, or a very short intervention for me, if the first thing that I say to you is that the IMO is going to embark on less new regulations, and that the focus of our work will be mainly the implementation of those existing ones. But the reality is that will make my life very easy, because it will be a very short presentation, but it doesn't really help you at all, because that's not the reality of the world we live in. This is a very ever-changing environment, and the environmental aspects are at the core front on discussions around the world. So the reality is that IMO have to keep up the pace with all those new challenges. We get criticism, to put it that way, that we over-regulate, but the reality is that if we don't keep working on global solutions, we then face different challenges when it comes to regional or national implementations. And the last thing that we want to avoid is to destabilize a very global sector, and that is shipping. Now, there is no denying that the environmental regulations, as I said, are at the forefront of all the IMO work right now. One of the aspects that we are confronting at the organization is that we are moving away from very technical discussions solely, as we used to have them in the past. And there's a lot more political environment that actually takes place when we discuss certain environmental regulations at the IMO. We are dealing with it. We are working together as a united family. And as a delegate and as a chairman of the committee, I still reaffirm every time that I address a very distinguished group of people like you that the work of the organization and the focus will remain on the technical solutions. We will address other aspects of those discussions, but the technical solutions are those that can be easily implemented, that can be broadly applicable, and it's actually the focus within the IMO Convention. Now, I'm not going to name or lay out every single standard within the MARPOL Annex 6. Most of you are very familiar, if not all of you are even more an experts than I am of MARPOL Annex 6, starting with your chairman today. And you will have the opportunity with the program that has been laid out to discuss in detail those particular standards that are now being implemented. But as you know, the sulfur emissions are right now one of the hottest topics in relation to the implementation of MARPOL Annex 6. Most ships operating both inside and outside the ECAs will have to comply, will have to perform the switch over on the field, will have to document it, and will have to be inspected. Now, that's where the regulatory framework allows, at the same time, from alternative measures. When we started the discussions to amend MARPOL Annex 6 back in 2006, and we ended up with the regulations that we have in place right now for 2008, there was the need for some flexibility, and that flexibility, so far, we have found it on the scrubbers. Yes, we understand that it's not the ideal solution, but we respond to those requests that we received. And we have provided an alternative solution for compliance on ships that operate within the ECAs. You will be aware that the media right now, we have been receiving and reading some concerns on the implementation of the new sulfur regulations. The majority of these concerns are related to the availability of equipment or the reliability of that equipment, the availability of the fuel, and the harmonized implementation from port state controls. At the IMO, we take all necessary steps to address all these concerns, and we will keep doing that. From the moment when we started the discussions, on amending or creating new regulations, before the implementation of the regulations, and once the regulations have been implemented, we carry out assessment, we evaluate the effectiveness and the applicability of the regulations, and take all necessary steps in order to make it effective. From the discussions, we know right now that we have further alternative fuels that could be used, like the LNG, and that's why we have already embarked and finalized the IGF code, which actually creates the framework for the safety in ships using LNG as a fuel. But there are also other types of fuels like methanol that we know that it's being widely used as well in the Baltic area, that we're also embarking on those studies to further include them on this code in order to keep the safety of the vessels at the same time that they lower the emissions and they can fulfill the environmental requirements. We understand that the infrastructure is not right there in place, but steps have been taken on that. In particular in Europe, we have heard of several projects that are being put in place in order to expand the LNG infrastructure from the port side. But at the same time, it's important to highlight that other aspects have been taking place, and some alternative options in the operational aspects have been developed. Some classification societies have developed already some software that the ship owners can utilize in order to keep the complete framework in place in relation to how the switched over is documented. So the reality is that we understand that at the same time that we provide regulations, there are certain organizations, several organizations that will then focus on further aspects that could be developed in order to implement these regulations. Also, in relation to port state control, there has been a campaign by those port state control in those countries within the ECA regions in order to send out the message of how these inspections are going to take place, what are the requirements that the operators have to look for. And we still look forward to receiving more information, in particular from the implementation sites, from the member states at the IMO during the next session of the MEPC. Now, the bunker delivery node, it's also very pivotal in the implementation of this convention. And that's another aspect where we have received concerns at the organization that some of the fuel that has been delivered to the vessels does not comply with the specifications. And in order to address those concerns, last session of the committee in October, we established a group that will analyze the framework, the legal framework that we currently have within the Marple Convention, and at the same time we'll develop guidelines that will be applicable for port state controls and coastal states in order to have the appropriate measures to fulfill the requirements as a member state, in order to guarantee that every operator receives the quality of the fuel that it pays for in order to comply with the regulation. I would like to stress that IMO is the only global organization that deals with this aspect. And I know that I mentioned it before, but for me it's important to stress that what we do at the IMO is to break down regional and national barriers. We want to keep regulations that are globally applicable. And the next step for us after the introduction of the requirements to reduce sulfur emissions in the ICA will be the global cap. And that's the next challenge that we have ahead, which will also be addressed in this conference. And we'll start the work already. Last year, in the April session of the MEPC, we established the correspondence group that actually started to develop the methodology that will be used for the study that we will start at the next session in May this year. That will give us sufficient time to gather the necessary experience and information in order to make an informed decision of whether we will apply the global cap from 2020 or if we have to make a different decision in relation to the outcome of the study. And again, that's something that we have involved, and we will look forward to have every single stakeholder within the shipping industry to take part on this very, very important assessment. I'm convinced that with the level of cooperation that reigns within the IMO, we will be able to make the best informed decision in order not to affect the shipping industry. And as an IMO delegate and as a chairman, I believe that it's paramount that we can promote on a world stage how green, how safe, and how practicable the shipping industry is. We sometimes work on different sectors, and we keep addressing ourselves as the container sector, the tanker sector, the passenger ship sector. But there are times that we have to get together. We have to work as a family. We have to send the message outside that we are doing our best to protect the environment. We are tackling the barriers for the implementation and the adoption of those regulations. We acknowledge that even though we're a very green sector, we still have work to do, and we still have that global population to protect. Let's move away from that individualism that sometimes reigns within the shipping industry. We know at the IMO that we have to address sometimes aspects in different parts of the sectors. But there are times like when we address the environmental concerns that we can do it all together. We can do it as a family. We can be those ambassadors that will make the shipping industry keep going ahead. We keep receiving concerns that probably other transport sectors will move ahead of us, that railway and road will actually try to shift way. But the reality is that it's very difficult to transport the amount of goods that we do in shipping through air, for example. So let's keep focusing on that. Let's use technology the best way possible for us. Let's implement the regulations in accordance to how they have been drafted. Let's not try to be wise and try to cut corners, because it doesn't help the industry, it doesn't help you. Let's move forward towards a future where sustainable shipping can be actually guaranteed through a very efficient shipping sector. And I'm very looking forward to listen to quite a few of the debates this couple of days, because the reality is that kind of information that we need at the organization to keep making informed decisions that will be satisfactory and very appropriate for the whole shipping sector as a whole. Thank you very much.